I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there. I'm completely hopeless at it. I was a really bad actor at school, and I've never been able to master the art of mimicry. But in feeling that fear every single day, and then I suppose they think to themselves, well, maybe that there is a way.
The afternoon began as a peaceful one in the palace, but then Queen Camilla made an order that would ignite royal tensions on a scale that had never been seen before. She ordered the removal of the portrait of Princess Diana from its place of honor. Some people viewed it as a courageous step toward changing history, while others regarded it as an act of complete disrespect. However, before the staff could carry out her command, Prince William arrived, his face displaying a dispassionate and determined expression. In addition to causing Camilla to stop in her tracks, the subsequent events caused the entire royal household to be in a state of disbelief. Both the clash and the fallout were extremely personal, and it was impossible to ignore either. Keep an eye out. A silent attack on the legacy that Diana left behind. It began with a quiet that was abrupt, deliberate, and deafening. There was no announcement, no warning delivered in a whisper. There was only a blank space on the wall of Clarence House where a portrait that was once known had been displayed. On the morning in question, gentle sunlight spilled over the East Gallery. Nonetheless, there was something essential that was absent. Although the royal staff had been trained to never respond, they pretended not to notice. However, one of the assistants who came through the corridor on a daily basis saw that the portrait of Princess Diana, which was graceful, radiant, and always delicately guarded by photos of her son, had just disappeared. It had not been relocated, nor had it been replaced. It's gone. Like a chill, whispers began to creep in. Staff members silently discussed whether or not there had been a routine rotation or a simple change in the curation, but those who had served for a sufficient amount of time knew what was going on. In royal palaces, portraits are more than just works of art. These statements are expressions of allegiance, power, and remembrance as well. It was not a coincidence that Diana was stripped of all figures without any prior warning or context. She had quietly fought through a brutal battle with cancer, and her reemergence was meant to symbolize strength and renewal. The message was loud, even if no words were spoken inside Kensington Palace. Preparations were underway for Princess Kate's long-awaited return, and the message was loud.
This, of course, came as a huge shock, and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of...
Nevertheless, another story was being told inside the walls of the palace, and it was one that was filled with resentment rather than joy. After working her way via the back channels, Queen Camilla had issued a decree to remove the portrait of Princess Diana. Although she may claim that it was not a personal attack, it nevertheless felt like the ultimate blow in a protracted and quiet fight over presence and legacy. The timing was purposeful. It was just a few days before Kate's return to the public glare, at a time when everyone would unavoidably compare her to the one woman whose presence continues to hover over the monarchy. This time, however, that presence had been subtly removed from the scene. The news did not make its way through the formal briefings. Diana's image, which had been quietly standing in the corridor like a heartbeat from the past, had been taken down, not lost, but removed on direct orders. This information was overheard by a junior staff member who overheard it in a whisper. It should have never been uttered out loud. He did not flinch, but something behind his eyes altered. In a palace where quiet cuts more than words, William knew exactly what this meant. He was aware of the significance of this. In spite of the fact that he was already making preparations for his next move, what started off as a slight erase would soon ignite something that Clarence House had no idea happened. Maintain a close proximity to the screen, the portrait, and the fire behind it. Not only was the missing image the cause of the tremors that were felt throughout the royal halls, a longtime attendant, whose eyes were ringed with disbelief, whispered to another person that the anger that followed was not from the general public or from Parliament, but rather from within the very heart of the monarchy itself. But this is not about art, it is about war. The response that William gave was instantaneous and explosive. Over the course of many years, he had managed to keep his rage under control, concealing his feelings behind the royal code of silence.
She was failed not just by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way rather than...
It was too far to go this far. It felt like an erasure of the lady who had a significant impact on everything he believed in when the portrait of his mother was removed without any explanation and removed from its spot next to the faces of some members of his family. His voice was firm and controlled, but it trembled with anger and betrayal. He called an emergency meeting before the sun had even set. His voice was tight and his speech was controlled. On the other hand, nobody anticipated what Kate, who is graceful and poised and is sometimes referred to as the soothing force amid William's storm, would say. She arose as if someone had been reborn, and the peacemaker could no longer be found. She was replaced with a woman who was no longer willing to behave in a pleasant manner. The stealthy maneuver that Camilla had performed had roused something furious within Kate's gaze, and it flared with the promise of defiance. We weren't simply talking about a frame here. She had never met the woman, but she had a great deal of respect for her. It was about a legacy. The compassion and honesty that Diana had shown had allowed her to break down walls and open doors, and now Kate was not going to let that to be erased by the silence and routine that she had followed. In the subsequent meeting that took place within Clarence House, the atmosphere was nothing short of electrifying. The wood-paneled walls, which were heavy with royal history, appeared to listen as voices appeared. In an effort to find words that would resound like thunder without causing a scandal, William stood with his fists clenched, despite the fact that he was not typically one to cause a commotion. As if it were an undesirable memory, the image of his mother, who had once been gently smiling above the fireplace in the vicinity of his study, had been gone. Then there was Charlotte, who was clever, curious, and possessed a tenacious spark that frequently reminded the staff of Diana herself. There was also Charlotte. One of the staff members recalled how Charlotte had once asked, in a very serious manner, if Grandmother D could see her from the picture frame. She had adored that portrait, and she was regularly found staring up at it, asking questions about the grandmother she had never met. However, she appeared to feel a profound connection to the person. Now that frame was gone, and along with it, something much more valuable, a connection between generations that had never been spoken, could no longer be found. Despite the fact that she was only a kid, Charlotte appeared to bear Diana's light, warmth, curiosity, and even courage herself. The removal of the image did not simply remove Diana from the room, it also removed her from the room. It conveyed to a little girl in a subdued manner that her position within that lineage might not be significant either. In the background, rumors stirred up staff members who had previously maintained their neutrality and suddenly felt disturbed. It no longer appeared as though Camilla's choices were merely silent updates. They took the form of irreversible changes. She had an understanding of the value of visuals. What was left and what was taken away was never only a matter of decoration. Through the process of modifying the past, it was possible to reshape the future. However, William had witnessed this before, so let's go back in time. In what way did the portrait actually vanish, and what part did a simple teacup play in the whole thing? Well, let's find out.
We've made huge strides. Obviously, there's a lot more to be made.
Camilla's command in a low voice. Camilla's voice was not raised at any point. It was not necessary for her to do so because the strength of her words did not originate from the volume of her voice, but rather from the atmosphere in which she talked, with her back straight and her tone light. That one, she whispered, pointing to a photo of a woman wearing a delicate blue dress. She gazed toward the wall and said something that froze the air more than any royal order that she had ever issued. The room is no longer suitable for it. The conversation continued as if nothing had been said at all, but those who heard her recognized that what she was saying was more than simply an image. Her spoon made a faint clink against her cup to indicate that she was speaking. The object was purposefully positioned outside of William's private study at Clarence House, and it was Diana. In the absence of procedure, the image had evolved into a hushed beacon that was selected for its presence. During the brief refurbishment of the area, Catherine had personally picked the same photo, which served as a symbol of continuity and a subtle reminder of where the family had come from and where it was headed. It brought harmony to the atmosphere of the room, both in terms of tone and spirit, but Camilla had always had the impression that it was an encroachment, a vestige of a legacy that refused to pass away gently.
Surely, political correctness is as severe a form of censorship as any.
The insiders say. Throughout her life, Camilla had a difficult time dealing with the shadows that lingered in the regal halls of Queen Elizabeth. This eternal dignity, Diana's grace that was unattainable, and the devotion that the public continued to pour on William and Catherine and their children and their offspring. It wasn't because of envy necessarily. Despite the fact that she had soared to a great height, there were still some stories that weighed more heavily on the crown than her own. This was a source of discomfort for her. The story of Diana in particular possessed a weight that could not be diminished by the passage of time. Therefore, the order was put through under the premise of a design choice that was clothed in casual elegance, but it was calculated nonetheless. Within a few hours, the portrait was removed without any fanfare or controversy. There was simply a blank space on the wall where it had previously resided. It was immediately noticeable to those who went by it every morning, and Catherine was one of those people. She did not speak, at least not at first, but she knew that William, when told, didn't need the details repeated. He could already see the outlines of something bigger, forming something personal. This was due to the fact that in the royal household, where paintings are power and placement is purpose, removing a portrait isn't just about taste, it's about territory. And Camilla had just trespassed, so the silence that followed wasn't empty. It seemed tense, as if something was being silenced, and it pressed down on every surface that had been polished. Rumors circulating in the West Wing. Camilla did not make any public statements at any point. A choice was made in silence, and the individual vanished without a trace. There was no royal proclamation, and there was no justification that was uttered. The image of Princess Diana, which had been placed in a corridor of Clarence House with a subdued reverence and had vanished overnight, was no longer there. Eleanor, an observant, long-serving aide who walked that hallway every morning, felt it immediately. The space where Diana's portrait had once hung, flanked by soft lighting and always within visual distance of her son's framed images, was now an empty wall, with no replacement, no label, and just silence. Royal staff personnel who were trained to move through palatial routines without reaction did not communicate their feelings. During the passing of footsteps, she paused, her heart beating a little quicker, and pretended to arrange a vase that was sitting nearby. In no way was it an error. Renovation was not the issue. Before, the staff has witnessed rotations of the curation, but never in this manner. A relocation was not what this was, rather it was an erasure. Over the course of a few days, the staff quarters began to hear distant muttering. Although Camilla's name was never mentioned, it was common knowledge that a move of this nature would not have been made in the royal household without her approval. Not only was art used for ornamentation, diplomacy was the term. The removal of Diana, particularly in the absence of any context, was used to convey a statement, and Eleanor, who had been a witness to both overt and covert disputes between the royal family over the course of several decades, recognized the significance of the actions that had been taken. It was not the tabloids that she called. She didn't even utter a single word to the majority of her contemporaries. However, Eleanor was unable to contain her emotions as she was engaged in a routine check-in with a reliable former colleague who is now employed at Kensington Palace. "Who is Diana?" she asked with a resolute tone. They brought her down. That single word was all that was required. The message spread not through the headlines but through the inner echo chamber of the palace, which consisted of a discreet and trusted line of devoted assistants who still felt attached to the memory of the princess who had passed away. This occurred within a matter of hours. William was aware of it by the time the following morning rolled around.
Impressed you most about her?
I think just the qualities that are essential for somebody in a leadership.
It did not appear in a report that was officially issued. The information was not conveyed in a briefing, nor was it accompanied by a courteous explanation. It was Eleanor's modest act of resistance, her refusal to allow history to be swept away like dust on a mantle, that was the source of this. William's voice was not raised at any point. Even if he did not barge into Clarence House demanding answers, it was clear that he was taken aback when the opportunity presented itself. According to some who were especially close to him, his stillness was the loudest they had ever heard. It was recalled by one of the advisors that he had been staring at the wall where his mother's portrait had been hanging for a considerable amount of time, to the point where even the guards shuffled awkwardly. A new portrait, one that had never been seen by the general public before, would soon take its position in Kensington, and this time William would not leave the decision to the whims of curators or senior royals. Within days, plans were altered, a private commission was surreptitiously granted, and these new portraits would soon take their place in Kensington. The painting was no longer the only thing at issue. This was a stance, a statement that he had to convey. In addition, Camilla may have been under the impression that Diana's presence could be discreetly withdrawn from view. However, she had failed to recognize something that would last for a far longer period of time, the loyalty of those who remembered, as well as the son who never forgot. But what actually took on inside Kensington Palace that evening was either a son paying tribute to his mother or the beginning of a secret rebellion.
The 20th anniversary year feels like a good time to remember, all the good things.
Remember to stay tuned to find out what the next event was. No major announcement, no dramatic scene, simply Eleanor's clear, steady handwriting that was given by a trusted assistant whose eyes avoided William's as he entered the room. William discovers that it all began with a folded note. There was no dramatic moment or grand announcement. One line revealed that something of his mother's, something personal, had been removed from its place under Queen Camilla's direction. The message was brief, but its weight could be felt in the space between the words. Additionally, the letter revealed that something of his mother's had been removed. William peered at the page as if it were going to change if he turned it over and read it once again. What had been taken was not only a decoration or a memento from the past, it was something that had been taken because it was a presence, a symbol, and a memory. It was something that should have never been altered in any way. His expression did not change, at least not in an obvious way. The signal quiet, however, was recognized by those who had known him for a sufficient amount of time. Behind that stillness was tension, similar to the kind that is present immediately before thunder. It wasn't about following the protocol. It had nothing to do with rank, courtiers, or choices made in the back room behind thick velvet drapes. This was about leaving a legacy, and it touched William in the same part of himself that had witnessed his mother, Diana, in the
about Princess Diana's death. Authorities now reviewing the new and sensational claim that she was actually murdered by the British government.
By the very same system, they were marginalized and diminished. They had tucked her away, removed her edges, and hoped that the public would forget how they had treated her spirit all those years ago. The silent removal of her painting was a reflection of what they had done to her spirit. While he was walking to the fireplace, he did not utter a single word. The moments that were framed to tell the story of his family were George wearing his proud regalia, Louis caught in the middle of his laughter, and Charlotte beaming in a way that only Catherine could make her smile. When William adjusted her frame, he did so more instinctively than consciously, as if he was protecting her from something that was hidden from view. After that, he became subdued and measured. It was a modest order that he gave to his private secretary, and there was no ceremony involved. I need every single detail, including who approved it, when they approved it, and why they approved it. Instead of confronting Camilla with his feelings, he was going to confront her with the truth. He wasn't going to do this in order to win a battle. Rather, he was going to do it in order to rectify a pattern, one that had once obliterated his mother. It would never happen again, not when he was watching William go in without knocking Prince down. He would not allow it to happen again. A whisper from a reliable source was what led William to make an unexpected visit to Clarence's house. This visit was not initiated by a phone call.
Have been brought closer because of the circumstances as well. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You are, uniquely bonded because of what we've been through. Yeah.
To the end. As soon as he entered the building through the side entrance, the atmosphere changed. There were no assistants or security personnel present. It was just him and the silent wrath of a son who had seen enough. Voices were lowered as staff members exchanged glances. There was a certain kind of silence that encircled everything, and it was weighed down by anticipation. While Queen Camilla was in the white drawing room by herself, she was flipping through the pages of her charity briefs. The footman came in with a gentle tap and a message that caused her to pause in the middle of her sentence. The message indicated that the Prince of Wales was present in the room by himself. Before she was able to form an understanding of what it meant, that had not occurred in that many years, he had already arrived at the door, and he did not smile or make any other pleasantries. He only stared at the door with a piercing, unwavering gaze. Neither did he sit down, nor did he take off his coat. The question that he posed was straightforward. Why was the portrait taken down? Not a portrait, not some kind of decoration. That was the one that was important to him. The response that Camilla gave came too rapidly, which is something that happens frequently when practiced words are caught off script. It was a simple change. William did not move at all, despite the fact that she said carefully that the room was being refreshed. However, George and Louis are still present. There is only hers left. Her justification became less compelling. It is not about her. It was about striking a balance. She is a young child. His response was that it was not a design choice. Camilla made an effort to regain her balance. Do you know how the media may manipulate information? It was not a personal attack. However, William did not have to raise his voice in order to make a profound impact, because this is not about pictures, but rather about rewriting history, and you do not get to select who is remembered. Then tell me whether it was for the purpose of public image or because of your own discomfort. Her face became frosty, and the customary polish was removed from it. He did not have any more excuses to wait for. As he turned toward the door in public, he issued the following command: put it back, or I will, and I won't stop there. But was it the silence that William left behind, a message that Camilla couldn't ignore, or a turning point that the palace had no idea was coming?
I commit myself to serve you all, King, country, and Commonwealth. God save the King.
You should keep watching to find out what happens next. A confrontation that took place behind closed doors. A white drawing room was where she was sitting at the time. The footman entered the building with a tone that was polite but apprehensive. The sunlight was flooding in through the huge windows. There is His Royal Highness present. Only you, ma'am. Camilla looked up perplexed because there was no prior notice and there was no private secretary to proclaim the visit. It was not William's usual behavior. As soon as she got up from her seat, he was already standing in the threshold of the entrance. Additionally, he did not sit down or offer a greeting. In spite of the fact that his coat was still on his shoulders and straightened, he did not utter a single word for a considerable amount of time. The question was then posed by him in a tone that was calm and collected. Why was the portrait of my mother removed? As if it were smoke, the query continued to hang in the air. Camilla blinked, thrown off by the directness she attempted to recover, proposing something vague, an update to the interior, rotating certain pieces and updating the space. Camilla was attempting to recover from the straightforwardness. However, William was not going to do that. There was no move in his stare. It was Diana, he added in a calm voice, and she was not decor. Her name is my mother. It was not a request, rather it was a reminder, and none of the regal titles were required for it to carry any weight. The quiet that existed between them elevated the unsaid tension that had been building up over the course of decades into a single unyielding moment. After that, the line that connected the past and the future appeared. It was a crucial moment. I will restore it in public, and I won't stop there. Restore it publicly. In addition, he did not wait for a response and did not stay for tea. The only thing he did was turn around and leave, providing more than just a warning. A decision was left behind by him. The portrait of her reappears, but this time it includes a voice. There was no official announcement, no press statement from the royal family, and no big reveal did take place. In spite of this, everyone was aware that on a Thursday that was mostly calm and covered in mist, a familiar silence had crept over Clarence House. This was the kind of hush that does not come with ceremony, but rather with meaning. In the hallways, employees who had been employed there for decades hesitated, and the atmosphere came across as distinct and heated. It was not something that was being celebrated, but rather changed. It was a royal conservator who arrived through a covert side entry. He was not accompanied by helpers or interns, but rather by two senior aides, the kind of company that conveys significance rather than routine. There was a portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales, which they were holding in their hands while maintaining silent. The portrait was wrapped.
Not make people dangerous to know. So you can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they...
Not tucked away in a lesser hallway or a room no one visited. No, this time it was placed in full view on the grand staircase where foreign leaders, relatives, and future monarchs would pass. Beneath her gaze, the image hadn't changed. It was still Diana in her calm strength, the same gentle poise, that same light in her eyes that once captivated the world, but now she was encased in a new frame, gilded and slightly larger, deliberate in its elegance. At the bottom, a brass plaque read, Diana, Princess of Wales, Mother of Truth, Heart of the People. This wasn't simply restoration, it was a reckoning, a quiet reclaiming. Word moved quickly through the palace walls, even if no one dared say much aloud, according to someone close to the Prince of Wales. The decision came directly from him. There had been, as the source carefully worded it, a private family realignment. But those familiar with royal language understood realignment meant William had made a decision, and this time it held one of his most candid interviews ever. Britain's Prince William is talking about the impact of losing his mother. He's hoping to help others by sharing his very personal thoughts. Later that afternoon, when Queen Camilla passed by the staircase, her step slowed. One attendant noticed she didn't speak. She simply stared, expression unreadable. Hands still not regretful, not wounded, just still. She understood that portrait wasn't just back. It now stood like a statement carved in gold. Diana's presence had never been erased, only temporarily misplaced at Kensington. William explained its return to his children with careful words. Diana's youngest granddaughter listened, curled up beside her father on the sofa. She's back where she belongs. William said gently, not for the world to see, but for us to remember. His daughter asked why it had ever been taken down. William paused. Some people forget what matters, he said, but sometimes love reminds them. In the tabloids, speculation swirled side by side, photos, questions with no answers, but Clarence House remained silent. They didn't need to speak. The frame said everything. Diana's image now hung not just on a wall, but in defiance of silence, in memory, in blood. Her place had never truly left. Now it had simply returned, stronger and impossible to ignore, the legacy William refused to let fade. It didn't start with a speech or a scandal. It started in silence, just like it had years ago when a young boy stood beneath palace ceilings and watched his mother's image quietly disappear from the walls that once celebrated her. That silence never left him, and now as a man and future king, Prince William decided it would speak no longer. This wasn't about one frame or a forgotten photo. It was about what that absence meant. In the grand tradition of the monarchy, power is often shown through presence. Who is seen, who is remembered, and who is quietly moved aside. Diana had once been everywhere. Her smile in the halls, her warmth in the press, her name on the lips of a nation, but in time that presence was softened, removed under the name of progress. Camilla's rise came with subtle shifts. One less portrait here, fewer mentions there. It was quiet, strategic, and intentional, but William had been watching what others called decorum. He remembered as pain. He knew what erasure looked like, dressed in tradition, so when he sensed that same cold routine tiptoeing back into Clarence House, he didn't raise his voice. He raised his mother. The portrait returned larger, bolder, and now positioned where it couldn't be ignored. Not tucked in a corner, but on a wall that mattered. Underneath a new inscription didn't just honor Diana, it defended her. Diana, Princess of Wales, beloved, brave, unforgotten. Camilla never publicly addressed its return, but those within the palace noted how her stride slowed near the staircase, her glance lingering a moment too long. It was enough. She knew for William, this was never about revenge. It was about memory, about protecting not just his past, but the truth his children would grow up believing. So what do you think truly pushed Prince William to bring back Diana's portrait? Grief, loyalty, or quiet resistance? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You